It's good to see this number out. Obviously, we are the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, so as you would expect, we've got a large number that are out of town. I haven't counted, so I don't know if we got more here, more away, but we do have quite a few that are out. Obviously, I'm not normally the Wednesday night teacher. Normally, I'd be downstairs with Jessa and Kiana, and we're actually studying the same book, but we're going at a much faster clip than I think what y'all are going. We are finishing up lesson number 14 from what Jesse informed me. So we're talking about specific and general, and he had mentioned that he added something to question 5. But before we get into that last bit of question 5, I wanted to just kind of go over just some of the basics of general and specific authority. I know that the class has been kind of question-themed based on Brother Doy's book. But how could God write a Bible, or how could God write the Bible in such a way as to give us everything we need without being so cumbersome and massive that it would be impractical? And obviously the answer is through general and specific authority. So what is general authority? When we talk about general authority, what are we talking about? Norm?
General authority is something that includes. So it's a fence around the yard, and everything inside the fence is included in the thing that you're talking about. So that would be the general authority.
Okay, Ms. Shirley?
Well, I was just going to say that you have more liberties to use certain things to carry out the work.
Okay, so she said you've got more liberties to carry out the work. So general authority is not confined by specialization or careful limitation. As Brother Norm said, it is inclusive, so it's inclusive or broad. So I think that, or I'm assuming you have talked about aids versus additions, or expedients versus additions already. And so with general authority includes any aid or method of execution that falls within the scope of command, example, or inference. So general authority is inclusive. Now what about specific authority? How would you define specific authority? Ms. Shirley?
That tells us exactly what he wants us to do.
Okay. Tells us exactly what he wants us to do. Norm?
It excludes things. It tells you specifically what you want, and then it excludes everything else.
Okay. So general authority would be inclusive, and specific authority would be exclusive. So specific, obviously, is something that is restricted or free from ambiguity. Very specific, easy for us to understand. It's excluding every aid or method in the scope of that which is specified. So within the things that are specified, then we have no say in the matter. We don't have to choose. So I was not in the class last week, but I did go back and listen to it. And at the very end of last week's lesson, I think Andy had the last comment, and he was talking about within the society that we live in now, you can basically order what you want from Walmart and get it. But within our understanding, just within our everyday lives, when I think of general versus specific, like on the smallest level, if Clarissa told me to go to the grocery store to get lunch, that's very general. Now, we've been married long enough, she probably can guess what I'm going to get, but all she said is get lunch. And so I can get as many chips as I want to get. I mean, that's lunch, right? So I can get all of these different things that, as long as I provide lunch. But if she said, go to the grocery store and get something to make sandwiches for lunch. Okay, so it's a little more limiting now. Still, I can choose, well, what kind of, am I going to get turkey or ham or probably bologna? I mean, we all know that's the best lunch meat. But if she says, go to the grocery store and get me a dozen eggs and a loaf of bread, now we're getting a little more specific, but there's still some even generalities in that. Well, she didn't specify what brand of bread or what brand of eggs. But with each thing, it's gotten a little more specific on what I'm supposed to get. So if she said, go get a dozen eggs and a loaf of bread, and I come back, which is probably what I would do anyways, just because we're in the marriage relationship, I would probably come back with some cookies and some chips too, and she knows she don't need to send me to the grocery store. But we understand these things within our everyday lives when we talk about general and specific authority. And God instructs us in the very same way. And I know that y'all have talked about this in class. God communicates the same way that we communicate. Obviously, God designed us and how that we communicate. So there are times when God commands us to do something but doesn't tell us how or where or when to do it. So within the realm of the command that He's given, we have the ability to choose. I think Ms. Shirley used the word liberty. We have the freedom to choose things that are going to, in and of themselves, be lawful to fulfill that command. And so we're given the freedom to choose which means and methods, how we want to fulfill that within, again, the scope of things that are lawful. And so we have this liberty or this freedom within this general and specific authority. And I'm sure that y'all have talked about almost all of these, if not all of these cases where we can look to God's Word and see different things regarding general versus specific authority. And that leads us to question number 5, which y'all had already talked about the first 4. And so at the very end of class, Brother Jesse said he wanted to add in music. And so the question is, list the general commands from the following scriptures as well as providing examples of what are lawful expediencies. So when we're talking about music, how would you answer that question? Okay, says singing. All right, so what passages would you go to talk about that? These other ones he listed passages for. Oh, he's got them actually listed on there. Never mind. I didn't have it listed on my stuff, so I didn't think he actually gave you that. So these are the 2 primary passages that we're going to turn to, Ephesians 5:19, Colossians 3:17, that do mention singing. So within these passages, what do we have there that would be general and what would be specific? So the singing is something that would be specific. All right, so if we're told to sing, then that's something that is going to exclude any other type of music. Lena?
Make a melody in your heart that excludes all the instruments.
Okay, so we've got the instrument that God has asked us to use, which is going to be our heart. That's very specific. And so again, that's going to exclude any other type of instrument. What else? Marissa?
Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. So
Okay.
it's whatever we feel like.
Okay, so we are given exactly what we are to sing, psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. All right, so, we may have some people that like Disney music, but that's excluded, sorry. What else? Norm?
You have who it's, the singing is to be directed to.
Okay.
To the Lord.
To the Lord?
Not to each other for our entertainment, to some other body or group of outsiders for their entertainment.
Okay. So, what are some things that we use that maybe aren't necessary, but they make it easier or more expedient for us to fulfill this command to sing? Ms. Francis?
Well, we use a song book, and the song leader may have a pitch to get the tune. You got an overhead.
Okay.
Song leader.
Yeah. So on Sunday night during our singing, it probably would have been good if I actually knew how to use a pitch pipe, could have pitched the song a little bit better. That's about the worst pitch song that I've led in a long time. So we have these tools to kind of help us to make it where it is more expedient and it is more in order. Can we sing from memory? Will we have to have songbooks? Sure. You got to have a good memory to be able to do that. Obviously, it would be hard to learn new songs as well. And so something new that we have is, of course, the slides that are on the screen. So most of you probably don't even use a songbook anymore. But all of these things are aiding us in fulfilling this command to sing. All right, anybody else on last part of question 5, Daddy.
We talked about the heart, making melody in your heart. Of course, that's an instrument itself, but spiritually speaking, I guess you might say. But Hebrews 13 in verse 15 actually uses the mouth, fruit of the lips, and so that's the singing, the vocal part of it.
Right. Yes. Anything else? Miss Shirley?
It's for teaching and admonishment also.
Teaching and admonishing one another. Yep. So we have a specific purpose that's given there. Anybody else? All right, so the last question from lesson 14 says, why does general authority not equate to just doing whatever we want? Norm?
God is always at the top from the standpoint of authority. So everything starts there. So if we go somewhere else other than to God as the highest authority, then we have a problem. We go outside of the bounds that God has established in His general authority.
Okay, so we've mentioned the word limiting. I think Norm may have mentioned in the last question, or not the last question, but describing general authority, fenced in. And so general authority gives us freedom, but not unlimited freedom. We can't just do whatever we want. There is still an area, a lawful area, within we have to work with. What else? Why does general authority not equate to just doing whatever we want? Miss Shirley, did you have something? Daddy?
So it is still a command. It's a general command, but it's still a command that, we have to follow. But yet with, limited decisions that we have to make, but it's still, whatever that command is, we have to follow it. Like, it tells us to go, we still have to go teach, go preach. But, so that's still a command we have to follow.
Yeah, obviously you can choose whichever method you want to go, and the method with which you choose to go is fine as long as you don't change the message. Obviously, we have a specific message that we are called to preach and to teach. What else? Why does general authority not equate to just doing whatever we want? Norm?
It goes back to the idea of authority itself and the role that we play in this, and we are the role of a steward. All of us are in the role of a steward. The steward only can act within the authority of his master, and God is the master. So can we do anything and everything we want? Not in the realms that God has established. That we can, as stewards, can only do what He has authorized.
So didn't Paul say all things are lawful for me? Okay. All right, so yeah, that's 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 12. Also 1 Corinthians 10, 23 and 24. And so we talked about this idea of freedom, and so freedom exists within the scope of what God has authorized, and not beyond it. And so we still recognize, and one of the things that I have emphasized over and over to the college kids is kind of from the title of the book, Mine Your King. We recognize Christ as our Savior, and we want to have Him. We want a Savior. But we also, when we submit to Him in baptism, we are also admitting that He is the King. He's not just our Savior, He is the King. And so when there is a king, then there are subjects that must be submissive. And so we are subject to the king. And so we can't just do whatever we want. We still have guidelines that we have to follow. All right, anything else on question 6 before we get into lesson 15? Shannon?
I was already there. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 22. And then even before, it's saying the different roles that we have in men and women when they're married and things. servant is the Lord's free man. I mean, so we're free, but we have his law. his
Yes.
rules. So,
Yep. There from verse 22 is what Shannon's talking about, for where he is called in the Lord while a slave. And yeah, absolutely. That's a good passage. Anybody else before we move into lesson 15? All right, so lesson 15 is dealing with, I think it's essay 6, talking about the individual and the church. And so Jesse had asked the question here, can one person be a church? Norm?
Well, the word for church is talking about an assembly, which in and of itself is describing a plurality of a group of more than one. Can't assemble yourself unless you have been blown apart, and then the doctor can put you back together, I guess. It's all about assembling.
Yeah. So the Greek word, yeah, for ecclesia, I think that it would exclude one person because of just by definition. And I mean, the point that Jesse's making from the question, obviously, is one person doesn't constitute the church. But when I saw this question, I couldn't help but think about, we've got a couple of sisters that are a church over in Plains, Montana. And Sister Mary actually texted me yesterday. And they've been worshiping together, I know, since 2021, and Mary and Susan. And it's a couple that I hope that with maybe our next exhortation meeting, we can actually send them a card. And so you've got a group there that they are worshiping together. But within this idea of the individual versus the church, the question may be, well, why are we even talking about this? Well, there are two theories that kind of pertain to this, what the Christian individual can do, the church can do. And this is an argument that I've been faced with before. And the other one is what the church cannot do, the Christian individual cannot do. And this is something, I mentioned something that I've dealt with, but this is not a new problem. So back in the Firm Foundation, back in 1960, Rule Lemons made this, or has this, in that article there in May the 3rd of 1960. It says, it seems to us that the one and only real principle underlying all the issues of our present time is that of church action versus individual action. We believe that if this one principle could be resolved, the issues, all of them, would disappear. We repeatedly hear the slogan voiced that anything the individual can do, the church can do. We do not believe it. We believe that there are certain things an individual can do and has an obligation to do that the church cannot do. The very fact that the Lord provided for an organism called the church is proof positive that it has some function peculiar to itself. If there were no functions peculiar to the church, it would be non-essential. There would be no need for it if the other capacities could provide all the functions of which it is capable. And the realm in which it had come up to me was I was in conversations, Bible study with someone about the church providing funds to secular institutions, and he had himself made the comment that, well, if the individual Christian can do it, then the church can do it, and was using that as his authority for what the church was doing. And so then we have to ask the question, well, is that so? If the individual Christian and the church are one and the same in the responsibilities that we have been given. So question number one is a four-parter. And Brother Jesse says it's argued by some because the church is made up of individuals, and whatever the individual can do, the church can do. And then we'll get to the A part here in just a second. But just with that statement, why is that argument flawed? Francis?
As an individual Christian, we can take care of individuals when we see they're in need, even though they may not be a brother or a sister in Christ. But the saints and the believers of the congregation.
Okay. Did I see another hand? So, one of the things that the four-part questions in the four passages that Brother Jesse has mentioned here is to give us scriptures where we can easily see within the New Testament that there is a distinction. The New Testament distinguishes between the individual Christian and the work that they are called to do, and the church and the work that it is called to do. So starting here with part A, it says, explain how Matthew 18, 15 through 17 makes the distinction between the church and the individual Christian. So let's go ahead and turn over to that. And let's go ahead and read that. So we'll start over here with Brother Ray. So Brother Ray, if you'll get 15, Miss Shirley 16, and then Daddy 17.
Oh, brethren, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and them alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he
will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every word may be established.
And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector.
All right, so how does that make the distinction between the church and the individual Christian? Miss Shirley?
Individual is going to his brother. It doesn't have anything to do with the church. It's two people.
Okay.
And so he's going to them, and if he'll, with reasoning, he will gain his brother.
Okay. Norm?
It's specifying a hierarchy as it goes up. You've got individual actions on those first two steps that are involved, and it's not until you get to the final step that now the church is involved, because it involves all of the members associated with that organization. So individuals acting, and then more individuals acting, but more individuals until you get the whole acting as one.
Okay. So, yeah, we've got three separate identities, I guess, going on. So, verse 15, you've got individual Christian. Verse 16, you've got individual Christians. And then verse 17, you've got the church. And so, when we think about this, when we think about even just within the passage here, we've got church action in verse 17. And so, it's going to involve a group of Christians acting collectively as a church. The work of the church becomes the responsibility of every member, and we'll talk about some more of these passages as we go through the lesson. But one member is not the body, like we talked about kind of at the very beginning. And so the term church is a collective noun. All right, English was not my forte. Sorry. But I do understand a little bit, and the term church is a collective noun, and so when we talk about a flock or a herd, that's a collective noun. So one sheep is not the whole flock. Again, that's something that is easy for us to understand. So Webster defines it this way. It says a collective noun is one which in the singular form denotes a collection of individuals, like an army, an orchestra, a crowd. It is treated as singular when the collection is thought of as a whole, and as plural when the individual members are thought of as acting separately. And so whenever we look at a chart like this, singular noun, plural noun, collective noun, a juror or jurors, the jury would be the collective. We've got a link, we've got links, and we've got a chain. All right, a link doesn't make a chain, and you can have individual links and they still don't make a chain. All right, the chain being the collective noun. And so when we look at Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 17, verse 15 again, talking about the individual Christian, that's the singular noun. Matthew chapter 18, verse 16 is Christians now in the plural form, so it's a plural noun. Verse 17 is talking about the church. Now we've got the collective noun. All right, so again, three separate entities here, one singular, one plural, and one collective. I hope my English teacher would be proud. Norm?
And we use it, this is commonly used within the criminal law system that we're all familiar with. It's not, if somebody breaks the law, the people that are, even if they hurt somebody or damage somebody else, the entity that brings the charge is the organization, the state. It'd be the state of Tennessee versus Norm Freese for whatever this is. And it's the idea, it's again the idea that the law is attached to that collective noun, that group. Ultimately, when that person sins at that low level, even though it's doing it against somebody else, it's doing it against somebody else under that law of that group.
Okay.
And it's just a matter of, can you solve it at the lower levels? But ultimately, it's always, you've sinned against God, is what has happened. And the Old Testament folks figured that out.
Yeah. So this is one way that I've always tried to remember this, and it's kind of helped me out a little bit. So a single unit of a collective noun is not the same thing as the collective. Again, we talked about in the sense of a chain. So one link isn't the same thing as a chain. One soldier isn't the same thing as the army. And so just because the individual Christian may be authorized to act in some capacity, it does not automatically follow that the local church may do so. And we see this distinction here within Matthew chapter 18 between one or two or more and the church. All right, anything else on a part?
And verse 17 also uses the word them, which shows a collection of individuals, but it still distinguishes it from the church.
Right. All right, B part. So go ahead and turn over to Acts chapter 4. We're actually going to back up just a few verses from where we've got listed here, but it's got Acts 5, 1 through 4, and we're going to explain how that makes a distinction. So go ahead and turn over, and we'll start in Acts chapter 4. And I want to start, let's start in verse 34. So we're going to read Acts 4, 34 through chapter 5, verse 4. Kiana, you good to read? All right, so Kiana, if you'll start with verse 34, and then we'll just work our way back a verse apiece.
Nor was there anyone among them who lacked, for all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the proceeds of the things that were sold.
Brother Bob, verse 35.
And what do you say that? How do you pronounce that? Josie?
What translation you got?
I got the King James.
Yeah, mine's NASB. It's got, and lay them at the apostles' feet. Anybody got?
J-O-S-E-S. What is that?
What? Spell it again.
J-O-S-E-S.
J-O-S-E-S.
Just looking at 36.
Verse 35.
Oh yeah, verse 35. Move back up one verse.
Oh, I thought she read that.
Acts 4, verse 35.
And lay them at the apostles' feet, and they distributed to each as anyone had need.
And Joseph, who was also named Barnabas by the apostles, which is translated son of encouragement, a Levite of the country of Cyprus.
Sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet.
All right, we'll jump up to Lena. Moving over to chapter 5 now.
But a certain man named Ananias with Sapphira, his wife, sold the possession.
And he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it, and brought a certain part of it and laid it at the apostles' feet.
But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land?
While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to man, but to God.
All right, so just looking at the context there, even back in chapter 4, what's going on here?
Selling of land.
Okay, so they've got possessions, they're selling the land. Why are they doing that? Because there was a need, Francis?
They were to, and the apostles were responsible to take that and, use that for the purpose.
Okay. So there's needs. Obviously, they've got saints that are in need, and we see some selflessness going on here where they're selling their possessions. The same language that we see over in chapter 5, we see in chapter 4, verse 35, and they laid at the apostles' feet. And so then, what's going on here in chapter 5 now? So Ananias and Sapphira, so they see, obviously, what's going on with the rest of the people that are selling their lands, and they do the same and give some of it to the apostles. But what was the problem there?
About what they had, they just told a portion of what it was from.
Was it a problem that they only gave a portion of what they had? Marissa?
The issue is that they played it off like they had given the whole amount. They weren't honest about what they had given. They made it seem better than it was.
Okay. So, yeah, obviously that's the problem. I mean, lying about it. It was no problem that they only gave a part. But how do we explain from this passage now a distinction between the individual and the church? Norm?
It was the idea of control of the asset in this particular case. While the land and the money associated with the land was under the control of Ananias and Sapphira, it was theirs to do with what they want. And so then comes the idea of the free will offering. They're going to give freely, supposedly, of their own free will, this contribution, except that they lied about how much the land was worth and how much they gave. They acted like they had given the entire price of the land, when in fact they'd only given a part and held it back. And it's implied that it was to gain some advantage amongst the people in reputation and because there was otherwise there was no reason to lie about the amount other than the fact that they had seen.
Yeah, it is hard to say, but I mean, I would feel somewhat safe. Obviously, if you've got somebody that's selling a bunch of land and then they're giving it away just to help other people out, they're probably going to be getting some pretty big pats on the back. I mean, I don't know, Ananias and Sapphira may have been seeing that and they're like, well, we want to feel that way too. So, Drew?
I was just going to say, just because Ananias and Sapphira were members of the church there, that didn't mean that the property that was theirs was as a collective a part of the church or owned by the church.
Okay. So there's a few things that I want to point out. So I mentioned chapter 35 of chapter 4, and they laid it at the apostles' feet. We know that Ananias and Sapphira had done the exact same thing. But then notice verse 4. So what Peter is trying to help them see before they take their last breath, he says there, while it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? All right, so they own this land. It's their land. They can do with it what they want, obviously within lawful means, but it's their land. That's what Peter's saying. Before you sold it, it was yours. All right, then notice what he says, continuing on in verse 4. And after it was sold, was it not under your control? Okay, so this is the land, you own it. Now you sold it, now you have the proceeds from it. Guess what? Now you own the proceeds. Was it not under your control? The land, it's under your control. The proceeds, it's under your control. Why is Peter making this distinction? There's a distinction between what you own and then laying at the apostles' feet. All right, so let's say that they sold the land and let's say that they had, a busted up buggy. And so they could have bought a new horse and buggy if they wanted to. I mean, that's at their discretion. All right? It's theirs now. Once they laid it at the apostles' feet, they can't now then take that money and say, well, I'm going to go buy a horse and buggy. All right? There's a distinction made between what they have the right and the ability to do with it when it's under their control, and now once it's laid at the apostles' feet. All right? There is a clear distinction made there. And so, same thing with us. Obviously, when we give on the first day of the week, I think Norm mentioned, or somebody mentioned about this being a free will offering. It is. I mean, there was no commandment that said, you sell your land and give your proceeds to the church. All right, so this is a free will offering. That's what we give every first day of the week. It's a free will offering. All right, there's nothing that says you have to give X dollars. All right, but while it is still in your bank account, you have the ability to do with it what you want. As an individual Christian, we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of the things that we have. But once we put it in the collection plate, once it goes into basically changing hands now, it's not under your control. Now we have a responsibility as a church to make sure that we are using the funds that are collected in the way in which we have authority for. But there's a distinction that is made there when the money is under your control, as it was before they sold it and even after they sold it, until they laid it at the apostles' feet. All right, anything else on part B? All right, so C part. So turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And we're going to start in verse 12 and read down through 14. And so, Tim, if you'll get verse 12, and then Norm, if you'll get 13, and then Shannon 14.
Whereas the body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ.
For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit.
For the body is not one member, but many.
All right, so following along with the theme here from this passage, how can we distinguish between the church and the individual Christian? Okay, so the body is not one member, but many. So to me, this kind of takes us back to our English lesson of the singular noun, plural noun, and the collective. So it talks about members here, and so we've got what would be a single member. We could continue reading on there in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and it starts off in verse 15 talking about the foot. So it's like, all right, well, that's the first member that it's going to talk about. So a foot is an individual member. It's not the church. It's not the body. All right, and that's a distinction that we should be making there. Obviously, the body here is talking about the church. And so the body comprised is the collective. And so my foot doesn't make up my body. My hand doesn't make up my body. My eyes don't make up my body. And so neither does it work that way within the church as well. And so Peter's entire argument is based on the difference in function and identity of the members and the body or the church. Anything? Go ahead, Francis.
Well, the church is the body of many Christians, but Christ is the head. So nobody in here is the head. They might be a foot, they might be a hand, but they're not the head.
Right. Anything else on 1 Corinthians 12? All right, let's try to squeeze in 1 Timothy chapter 5. I'm sorry, Jesse. I thought I was going to get farther. 1 Timothy 5. I'm so used to having to go so fast, and then I get in here and... All right, for sake of time, we're not going to read all 16, or the first 16 verses, but let's just read verse 8 and verse 16. So, Jessa, if you'll read 8, and then Andy 16.
But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
If any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows.
All right, so from this passage here in 1 Timothy chapter 5, how can we make the distinction between the individual Christian and the church? Ms. Shirley?
Well, when my mother and daddy were living and my aunt was living, it was my responsibility to take care of them, not the church's responsibility.
Okay.
So it's an individual as far as family's concerned. So if they've got any relative, my aunt didn't have, her 2 children died before her, she didn't have any grandchildren. My mother and daddy wasn't able to take care of her when she got sick, so I was the only one left.
Okay.
So it was my responsibility to take care of her.
So we actually just recently talked about this with the college group, and I was pretty emphatic explaining to them, like pointing to them, you have a responsibility to take care of your parents. You got a responsibility to take care of your grandparents. Paul makes it very clear here to Timothy in verse 4, but if any widow has children or grandchildren, they must first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. And so we have a responsibility as individual Christians to take care of our family. That's God's design. Now, is the church excluded from taking care of those that are widows indeed? No, that's not what it says. What does it say? There's one phrase that I really want us to pay attention to there in verse 16. What's the key thing there in verse 16?
And that be widows indeed.
All right, that is one. Jessa?
Let not the church be burdened.
All right, see, Jessa's already heard this, so she didn't get it. That the church not be burdened. All right, so if the families didn't fulfill their responsibilities, it could ultimately become a burden on the church. Do we have an obligation to take care of our own? Sure. And we have the authority to do that within God's Word. But first it is to go to the families. The families are supposed to take care of their families, and the church then is going to take care of those that are widows indeed, so that the church not be burdened. And I know that y'all have already talked about this, but what's the primary mission or work of the church? It's spiritual in nature, and so we've got evangelism, we've got to save people, we've got edification, which we can't lose sight of. And so while evangelism is saving people, edification is keeping saved people saved. Both of those are important, but we also can take care of our own, but our primary responsibility and work and mission is one of a spiritual nature. And so I think all of these passages, including 1 Timothy chapter 5, help us see a distinction between work that is given to individual Christians and then work that is given to the church as well. And we just see a distinction made between the two within the New Testament. So I'll let Jesse know that y'all can pick up with question 2 in lesson 15. Man, I bet I went slower than him. Surely he gets through mostly one lesson.